Chapter 11 of John Smith's Funny Adventures on a Crutch, or the Remarkable Peregrinations of a One-Legged Soldier After the War. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Shelley Weingart. John Smith's Funny Adventures on a Crutch, or the Remarkable Peregrinations of a One-Legged Soldier After the War, by A.F. Hill. Chapter 11. Narrow Escape in a Row at Baltimore. About the middle of March, I concluded to take a tour of Baltimore, Harper's Ferry, Antietam Battlefield, Hagerstown, and Harrisburg, at all of which places, and especially Antietam, I had been before. I intended to occupy 3 or 4 weeks, and made arrangements to act meantime as a correspondent for a paper. Nothing unusual happened to me on the way to Baltimore, except that on looking from a car window at Havre de Grace, a small particle of cinder from the engine flew into my eye, which kept it red and inflamed, and furnished me with first-class pain, at intervals, for the ensuing 2 weeks. A bit of cinder from a locomotive with all its fine points is, I think, the severest thing that can work its way into a man's optic organ. Had railroads been in vogue in the days of King John, what a point young Arthur might have made, when remonstrating with Hubert, who had been authorized to burn his eyes out with a red-hot poker, and eloquently decanting on the sensitiveness of the eye by reminding him how it felt even when a cinder from a locomotive got into it. For example, how would the passage read in this shape? "O heaven, that there were but a mote in yours, a grain, a dust, a gnat, a wandering hair, or the 10,000th part of a dead spark from the smokestack of a locomotive. Any annoyance in that precious sense. Then, feeling what small things are boisterous there, your vile intent must needs seem horrible." It will be perceived that the 2 lines in italics are my, John Smith's, own production. The rest is Shakespeare's. I will not venture to predict what critics will say of the relative merits of the 2 authors in this case. As the trains from Philadelphia enter Baltimore, they cross a wide, clean, quiet street called Broadway. It bears no resemblance to the Broadway of New York, as it is occupied chiefly by private dwellings. The trains always stop there a minute or two to allow those who wish to get off. This street runs north and south, and of course crosses Baltimore Street, the principal business thoroughfare, which runs east and west. The Baltimore Street Railway extends down Broadway, and as several cars are always in waiting when trains arrive, many passengers get off the train here, take a streetcar, and ride into the heart of the city. I always do so when I visit the monumental city. I did so on this occasion, having first instructed the baggage express agent to send my trunk to my hotel. As I jumped from the train, before it had quite stopped, and walked toward the streetcar that stood waiting on Broadway, a soldier approached me, and tapping me familiarly on the shoulder, said, "Why, Locke, how are you?" I saw at a glance that he had mistaken me for someone else, and soberly replied, "I believe this isn't I." "Oh, so it isn't. Excuse me," he said, perceiving his mistake and laughing at my joke. I got into a crowded car and rode to my hotel on West Baltimore Street, for the principal street is divided into East and West Baltimore streets by a canal, which it crosses near the center of the city. Having a week or 2 before me with very little to do, I determined to see all the places of interest in the vicinity, for I had theretofore neglected to visit them, although I had frequently been in Baltimore. I had never even visited the Washington Monument there. Here let me commend Baltimore for being the only city that has ever erected a monument to the memory of that pure-hearted patriot to whom we are indebted for our liberties and free institutions, George Washington. Baltimore has another monument, which was erected in honor of the Maryland soldiers who fell in the War of 1812, and is hence styled the Monumental City. The Washington Monument is indeed quite a fine structure. It is built of marble to the height of about 200 feet, and its top is adorned with a large statue of the Father of his country. Within is a spiral stairway of stone, like that in the Bunker Hill Monument, but it is not lighted with gas, nor has it any embrasures for the admission of air and daylight. The superintendent, or someone employed for the purpose, accompanies each visitor who wishes to ascend, carrying a lantern. He may well be termed a man who has a great many ups and downs in the world. From the top of this monument, the view of the city is excellent. Almost every house in it can be seen. Of course I visited this monument, but as nothing extraordinary occurred, and especially nothing funny, I will not entertain the reader with a full description of my visit, nor of the monument itself. I was always fond of rowing, and as the weather was mild and pleasant next day, I concluded to go down to the harbor, hire a boat, and take a row. I was told that I could get one at the foot of a little street running obliquely toward the piers from the junction of Broadway and Pratt Streets, the latter being the street on which the Philadelphia trains run into the city, and I took a streetcar and went down. When I asked the man for the boat, he looked at my crutch and said, "Can you row?" I told him that reminded me of a lady friend of mine who, shortly after my return from the field of glory, asked me if I didn't find my corporeal defect very inconvenient about eating. "Why shouldn't I row?" said I. "A man don't hold the oars with his toes any more than he holds his knife and fork with them when eating at the table, which would look rather odd, and render it necessary for him, instead of sitting in the usual manner, to take a somewhat novel position." No further doubts were expressed as to my ability to row, and I got into a 50 cents an hour boat and rowed out into the harbor. "Be careful," was the owner's admonition as I pulled away, "that you don't get caught in a squall and be driven away. The weather is uncertain in March." "No danger," I replied, and my boat glided out to where there was a stiff breeze blowing, and was soon dancing on the waves. I moved toward the southeast a mile or so, rested a while near a ship that was laying an anchor, and had a chat with one of the mates. I was beginning to pull away from the ship when I heard an excited voice toward my right sing out, "Look out there! Where the deuce are you going?" Immediately followed a confusion of voices, the ringing of bells, and the shriek of a steam whistle. I turned in the direction, and was somewhat alarmed to discover that I was about to cross the bow of a propeller that came dashing along. Had I pulled the oars but once more, nothing would have saved me from being run down. My boat would have been shivered to pieces. I would have been stunned, and my chances of being saved from a watery grave would have been as 1 against 100. With all the presence of mind I could command, I backed oars and checked my boat, which of its own accord turned sidewise, and the propeller rushed by at such a trifling distance from me as to strike the blade of my right-hand oar. "Whew, my young man," said the mate with whom I had been talking, for he still stood by the bulwark, "you came near going down." I fully realized this, and quite satisfied with my row, put back for shore. The wind had increased, and I now noticed for the first time that some dark clouds were coming from the west. I had a good mile to row against the wind, which, as well as the waves, was every moment increasing in violence. I was yet a quarter of a mile from the dock in which the boat belonged, when a regular squall came on. Then I had a time of it. Throwing off my coat and hat and placing them in the bottom of the boat, I grasped my oars and pulled away with all the strength and energy I possessed. I made rather slow time, and when within 100 yards of port, I perceived that I was just making out to lie still against the wind. I was nearly exhausted, and felt like throwing down my oars in despair. But seeing what a short distance was yet to be accomplished, I nerved myself for a final effort, and such a battle as I had with the wind and waves, no one need want to engage in. After 10 minutes of the most strenuous exertion, I arrived in the dock, trembling from exhaustion, perspiring from exercise, and wet all over with spray. I concluded, taking my narrow escape into consideration, that rowing in the harbor was no delightful recreation, and solemnly vowed never again to venture out there in a rowboat. I kept my word faithfully till next afternoon, when the weather being very delightful, I broke it, went out again, and had a very pleasant row in the same boat. At 4 o'clock one evening I left Baltimore for Harper's Ferry via the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, having first sent my trunk back to Philadelphia by express. I arrived at Harper's Ferry by 9 o'clock. A great many soldiers were there, for it will be recollected that the war was not yet ended, and I found it difficult to secure a comfortable lodging. Every private house was acting the part of a hotel, furnishing supper to many soldiers and a few sorry-looking travelers, while those desiring a night's lodging were packed into rooms at the rate of from 7 to 27 in each. By paying a few dollars extra, talking politely, and pretending that I was not in the best of health, although I eat an astonishing supper for an invalid, I succeeded in securing a small room to myself, to which I retired immediately after supper, and having carefully fastened the door, I lay down on a clean bed and slept comfortably till the morning. End of chapter 11.